Mr. Cooper, would you agree that an emergency usually denotes something imminent, something urgent?
Yes, Senator.
So it wouldn't refer to something from years ago. So I read this May 24th memo from the Secretary multiple times, and yet I just can't seem to find where it lays out the emergency that these sales address. I see references to designations dating back to 1984, events from 2014, and general instability that has been plaguing the region for years. But nowhere do I see where it says what the emergency is. So tell me, what is the State Department's operative definition of an emergency that you used for these sales?
Thank you, Senator. So the statement you're referring to, the actual declaration, is an unclassified document, and you're correct to note that there's context in there of this particular adversary and their persistent threat stream, as well as what their proxies may or are capable of doing. What actually equates to an emergency, as is where we are today, is the current threat posture of Iran and what was calculated there from an interagency aspect. There were multiple tools, including this declaration.
Let me stop you because I don't have unlimited time.
Okay.
Answer my question. What is the definition of emergency that you use for these sales?
A confluence of conditions that were assessed required several tools by the administration, including an increase of force posture, this emergency declaration, and application of sanctions. That did equate an emergency status.
None of that really has changed from the present to the past. Did the legal advisor's office opine on what an emergency is?
The legal advisor's office assured and cleared on the statutory authority that was made available for the secretary to make this decision.
Did the legal advisor issue a legal opinion?
Legal advisor's office was part of the process, and this was a decision.
I asked you, did they issue an opinion?
In this forum, I'm not going to talk about the pre-decisional process on the option that
Did they
the
issue an
secretary had.
opinion? What's the pre-decisional process? They either issued an opinion or they did not issue an opinion. Did they issue an opinion? That's not a question of a pre-decisional process. Do you have an opinion in your possession?
Senator, the legal advisor's office participated in the application of the certification as noted by statute for the Secretary's authority.
You're not answering my question, and I'm not going to let you get away with what you got away with in the House. Either you have an opinion, in which case I want to see it, and if you don't have an opinion that's written, then you ultimately invoked an emergency, but without a legally defined opinion of what that emergency is. Why did the State Department never utter the word emergency to me or my staff in relation to any of these sales at any point prior to the Secretary's emergency certification?
Senator, as you noted and others have noted, on May 21st, there was a classified briefing that was provided to Congress. In that briefing, there was details about the current threat posture with Iran. This certification was an option as a tool, including invocation of sanctions or application of sanctions.
The words emergency, Mr. Cooper, were never used by anyone from the Secretary of State all the way down. Did you discuss declaring an emergency for these sales with the Secretary before the Secretary briefed the Senate and the House on May 21st and 22nd?
Senator, all the cases in the emergency, including cases that were not included in the certification, were part of our interagency process, not only with the department, but the normal review process. We provided options for the Secretary to make his decision on application of the certification.
Did you discuss an emergency as part of that?
Again, in an open forum, I would say looking at intelligence community assessments at the time.
I'm not asking, wait a minute.
It's part of the...
You want to divert to classified so you don't have to answer. I didn't ask you a classified question. I simply asked you, did you declare the possibility of an emergency declaration prior to May 21st and 22nd? That's not classified.
No, Senator, The calculus is inclusive of that data. So the data is an absent of intelligence data. So that is part of the consideration of
I'm not
things like
asking
force
you about
posture.
intelligence data. I'm not asking you about how you came to the decision of an emergency in this case. I'm simply asking you, Mr. Cooper. This is far from the transparency that you pledged to when you were before this committee. Far from the transparency that led me to support your nomination. Simple question. Did you offer up an emergency as an option prior to May 21st and 22nd?
There were a number of considerations and tools made available for the interagency, inclusive of sanctions, this emergency, and force posture. Any of those could have been applied, or none of those could have been
So you
applied.
did discuss an emergency prior to May 21st and 22nd.
Threat posture is continuously assessed. It is assessed before May 21st, Senator. We don't stop assessing it.
Iran has been a continuing threat posture, let's be honest.
Upticks and changes in posture.
Your unwillingness leads to a total lack of transparency and is insulting to the Senate when the Secretary was before us the day before he ultimately made this decision and never mentioned in front of 100 United States senators that there was going to be an emergency declaration. I find that overwhelmingly amazing to try to believe that all of a sudden an emergency came up just right after we were briefed. Preposterous.